I'm Simon Bennett. I'm a director and producer and executive producer and showrunner. I do theatre and television and films, and I'm based in Auckland, New Zealand. But whatever you do, don't encourage this.
Hey everybody, this is Mark Von Bullock, and you are listening to Don't Encourage This, a series of conversations on meaning-making and creativity with artists and interfaith voices. We are broadcasting just steps away from the world-famous Miami University campus in the heart of the breathless, captivating beauty of Southwest Ohio. My guest this episode is Simon Bennett, a New Zealand-based producer and director for theater and television. Simon has spent nearly 2 decades shaping the iconic, long-running New Zealand-based soap opera Shortland Street, working as a director, producer, and executive producer before eventually becoming head of drama at South Pacific Pictures, the largest television production company in New Zealand. Simon is also a pioneer of the landmark Bats Theatre in New Zealand, which was restored in 2014 by Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson and his partner Fran Walsh. He has also enjoyed a prolific career in American television, serving as a director and eventually showrunner and executive producer for Saban's Power Rangers from 2019 to 2023, including the 30th anniversary TV film Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Once and Always. Simon Bennett is one of the most creatively versatile directors and producers working in television and film. His storytelling spans everything from Shakespeare to Sondheim, from soap operas to spandex, from science fiction action and special effects to backroom cabaret theater. In addition to all of that, he's a really genuinely lovely guy to talk to. During our conversation, I wanted to hear about his story growing up as the child of 2 performers, experimenting with light and sound production as a young boy, and the remarkable journey to founding, growing, and revitalizing what has become New Zealand's landmark theater scene. We talk in depth about the grind of producing a 5 episodes a week television show, as well as the joys, perils, and creative challenges of working on Power Rangers during what became one of the most critically acclaimed runs of its 30-year TV history. I'm thrilled to welcome Simon as my guest this episode on the program. Let's hop on a Zoom call and get Simon Bennett on the horn.
How long have you been doing these podcasts?
This one I've been doing for a couple of years now. It's very infrequent. It's nothing too fancy. I did one kind of like this a couple of years ago. That was in 2014 until about 2019 or so. So it's kind of an on-again, off-again hobby, but it's fun. It keeps me out of trouble.
It's a great form, isn't it?
It really is.
It's wonderful, yeah.
It's a really wonderful facility for getting to talk to people that you wouldn't ordinarily have any occasion to speak with, but for some reason, if you put a microphone in front of yourself, then it's like, okay, I'll talk to you. It's very funny.
That's right. And also, if you're the subject of an interview, you think about things and talk about things in a way that you wouldn't normally on a day-to-day basis. It kind of works both ways.
That's true. Well, Simon, according to my exhaustively researched Google Doc, you were born in Australia, but grew up mostly in Sheffield, England. Is that correct?
That is correct. I was born in Adelaide. My parents were English, and they were in Australia on a £10 immigrant scheme, which Australia ran in the 1960s. And when I was born, after they'd been there 3 years, I think for some strange reason, they decided they didn't want their child to grow up to be Australian. So they relocated back to the UK when I was about 6 months old. And I lived there till I was 9. And when I was 9 years old, my family moved to New Zealand for work reasons, for my father's work.
I wanted to ask you about your parents, Robert and Jane. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
I read that they were founders of Mime International and toured the globe as performers. Is that right?
That is absolutely correct. You have done your research. Yeah, they met at drama school in the UK, both wanting to be actors at the time. And when they came to New Zealand, it looked for a while as if my father's employment as a drama lecturer at Teachers College in Wellington was insecure. So they cast around looking for an alternative way of earning a living. And they came up with the idea of a touring mime company, performing in schools and all around the country. And that grew, and it became my father's lifelong passion, really, much more than teaching, which was his proper job. Performing mime, apart from race walking, which he also loved, became his overriding passion. And as well as touring New Zealand, they went to most of the Pacific Islands, Australia, Singapore, Mexico, Zimbabwe, Russia. So my father, this was in the pre-internet days, spent a lot of time writing letters and making friends with people in embassies. And he was very good at what we would now call hustling
I love
to
it.
get invitations to festivals. And so as I was growing up, because my whole family obviously was on the road quite a lot of the time, my job was to do the lighting and the sound. I was the technical operator, and my sister and both my parents were performers.
And how old were you about when you were doing the lighting and the sound?
I think I probably started about 14 or 15. Always really enjoyed technical theatre, and recording and lights and sound was always something that I was interested in. When I was about 10, I loved a old 1950s British radio show called The Goon Show.
Oh, yes.
Which was Spike Milligan's wrote them, and it was Spike Milligan and Peter Sellers and Harry Seacombe were the three performers. I had 2 books with all the Goon Show scripts in them. And on my parents' little cassette recorder, I used to record them and do all the voices and the sound effects live. And
that's so good. I love it.
Edit if necessary, sort of tape to tape, had 2 cassette recorders. It was a very primitive type of editing. That was my idea of fun as a child.
The Goons were sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, they were sort of the precursors to Monty Python. Is that right?
Yeah, they were. It was a very surreal, very British kind of humor. It was a comedy show. It was completely absurd. I think the 3 performers had first started performing together when they were soldiers during the Second World War, and the Goon Show grew out of that. But they were definitely an inspiration for a whole generation of British comedians, and Monty Python was one of the offshoots of that. I mean, Spike Milligan kept going in parallel to Monty Python with his series of they were called Q shows, like Q6, Q7, Q8. They were completely bizarre and surreal comedy series. What they used to do was that there was no punchline. They'd do a sketch, which was completely absurd. And then a character from the next sketch would walk in and say, enough of this nonsense, on with the show. And the others would just walk away slightly bemused. So it was kind of anti-traditional comedy. And I loved it.
And Monty Python did a bit of that too on Flying Circus, where the sketches would just sort of flow together in kind of this very surreal, non-linear fashion.
Yeah, Monty Python was a huge influence for me. My parents used to let me stay up late and watch it when we were still in the UK. I think it was on like 9:30 or 10 o'clock at night on a Sunday night on BBC Two. And so, I would have been 8 or 9 years old, and I just loved it so much. And there's no way of recording TV back in those days. So my parents used to let me stay up and watch it. I watched them again and again. I used to record the audio on the cassette recorder that I had of those TV shows just by putting the recorder by the TV. And I would learn some of the sketches and perform them with my friends at assembly at school.
Oh, that's so great.
So I was actually getting into directing and performing in a theatre sense and a comedy sense back when I was 10, 11 years old. I never thought back then I might end up doing something for a living connected to that. It was just something that was a huge amount of fun for me. I don't know if I was good at it or not. I would love to go back and see those performances now. They were probably cringingly embarrassing, but I did know that I was very confident doing them. And I found a new level of relaxation and enjoyment when I was working with performers and scripts that I hadn't experienced anywhere else. Partly because I'm naturally a very introverted, shy person, but when I was rehearsing or performing, all that disappeared. It went out the window. So it was one of the only times when I felt free of that kind of social anxiety curse that I'd had.
It is interesting how the theater does that. Years ago, I was involved in community theater for a while, and many of the actors and performers that performed in shows were introverts. The little community theater that I was involved with, we would do, after the show, the cast would have a little bit of meet and greet time where the audience could come out and they'd all be in line and they could shake hands and say good show and all that stuff. I just remember there was an actor who had been there for years and years and years. It seemed like he'd done a zillion shows. he told me one day, he's like, I really don't like doing that meet and greet part. And I was like, why? And he's like, I'm just so introvert. I'm kind of shy. And I was like, what do you mean you're shy? You were just on stage doing this impassioned monologue. But that's the paradox of performing, I suppose.
Absolutely. And in the professional world, a lot of work gets done in those post-show social occasions.
Yes.
Particularly on opening nights. I was involved in a touring theatre company back in the early 2000s with three friends and colleagues of mine, Tim Bum and Katie Wolf and Robin Malcolm. And I'd already been working in TV for a number of years, and this was going back to theatre, wanting to reinvent the form and get back to the roots of what I love doing most. We were touring large-scale Shakespeare productions around the country. And, there was quite a significant amount of sponsorship involved because touring a cast of 15 actors is a very expensive business. And luckily for me, my three business partners in the venture were very good at schmoozing, because I would just kind of flip away and not participate, because making small talk brings me out in a cold sweat.
And schmoozing in particular is a kind of small talk. Like, I'm an extrovert, I'm not introverted, but schmoozing I don't find enjoyable at all. Like, I can handle friendly chit chat, but once we're trying to get into like networking and all that, that's just, I don't enjoy that.
No, but it is the glue that binds the entertainment industry together. Those networking connections are where projects are generated and where the money to make projects is raised.
Yes.
And it is so significant in all aspects of the industry. Luckily, there are people out there who are very good at it, and, all power to their bow.
So you were 14, 15 years old. You were listening to the Goons, and you were sort of playing around with kind of learning about the theatrical process and doing a bit of performing. Do you think those experiences led you to want to pursue drama school a little bit later on?
No, the opposite. I kind of stopped performing probably when I was about 11 or 12.
Okay.
Because that was a primary school thing. I did keep helping my parents out with sound and lighting on tours, but that was fine because it wasn't performance-based. But I was also, as I kind of hit my teenage years, increasingly embarrassed by my association with my parents, who would tour schools performing with white face and makeup and mime. I went to an all-boys, very conservative school in Wellington, and it was excruciatingly embarrassing when they came to perform. And it would take six months for me to live that down. So there was a period there where I rebelled against my parents' life choices, and I actually left school and started university training to be a lawyer. That was my first choice, and that was because I went to a very conservative school, and you were either good at maths and sciences or languages and history. And I was in the languages and history camp. And the expectation was, if that was your strength, you would study law.
Okay.
If you were strong in the sciences, you would study medicine. Those were the kinds of two expected, respectable career options. And I actually did 2 years of law at Victoria University. I didn't take to it because I used to like watching TV shows. Like, there's a British show called Crown Court, and I'm sure there are American equivalents, courtroom dramas. I used to like the tension of the barrister or the attorney walking around the courtroom and, pulling critical evidence out of the hat at the last minute and saving the day, And I thought law would be a bit like that, but it wasn't anything like that. It was very dry, and rather than opening paths of thought, I found it closed down paths of thought. It basically trained you to think along quite narrow and prescribed lines, which wasn't for me. Obviously, you've got to learn case law, and you've got to apply various precedents and rulings to the situation that you're dealing with now. So it's a bit like a mental flow chart in terms of how to solve particular problems based on knowledge. And I just didn't like it. And at the same time that I was doing law, I was also doing an arts degree. I was doing a double degree. So my arts degree, I was filling up with the things that I actually enjoyed. It was mainly an English literature degree, but my girlfriend at the time happened to be doing drama studies at Victoria, which was theatre and film studies. And basically on a whim, I signed up to do that, basically so we'd have more time in shared classes, I guess, was the initial motivation. But once I got into it, it was an epiphany moment. It was like suddenly I found the thing that I felt defined me, where I was strongest, and everything else just faded into the background. And this one thing, which ended up being directing, you start with more general subjects, and then as you move through the years, you specialize more. And I ended up specializing in production/directing. And I just loved it and poured so much energy and thought into it. And at the end of my degree, my lecturers sort of pulled me aside and asked me if I'd ever considered directing professionally.
Ooh.
I hadn't, because I didn't realize there was such a thing as a job, being a director. For me, it was just like this thing that I really loved doing. And they recommended that I audition for the New Zealand Drama School, and they put in a good word for me. And I did that after I'd finished my university degrees and was accepted as an actor for a 2-year training course at the drama school. And I never really wanted to be an actor because I was always a bit too self-conscious to be any good at it. I think to be a good actor, you have to be able to take big risks and lose your sense of watching yourself when you're performing.
That's hard to do.
Yeah, I always had an eye on myself, and I had those classic situations where you find yourself not knowing what to do with your hands and just incredibly self-conscious. So I was never a very good actor, but I went through an actor training and experienced all the pains and hellscapes that actors have to go through.
All the exercises and all that stuff.
Yeah. Oh, creative movement. Yeah, all the different dance forms.
Oh, yes.
Scary. My rationale to myself was that understanding how actors work and think and understanding the acting process would probably make me a better director, which is what I really wanted to do. And I do think in hindsight that it did. Whatever the type of teaching, to have 2 years or 4 years, if you include my university time, focusing on learning about a particular practice and connecting with a whole cohort of peers who would become my peers as I moved further into my career, was an absolutely invaluable experience.
And what do you think it was about directing in particular that you enjoyed? I think directing is such an intriguing aspect of the creative process, and especially when someone is very good at it, almost intuitively. What are the aspects of directing that you think spoke to you or maybe still speak to you?
It's a number of things. I think text analysis was something I was always very good at, because of my English background and facility with language. So I was quick to be able to break down a script and understand character and story and intention and all those kinds of things that are the building blocks of drama. I really enjoyed the process of making. I was never a director who had a clear picture in my head of what the end result would be, and directing being about fitting all the pieces together to achieve that result. I was never very interested in that. I was more interested in harnessing other people's imaginations as well as my own in a focused way to see what we would come up with through the rehearsal process. So collaboration, working with people with different life experiences and imaginations in a focused way, I just found a huge amount of joy in that. And I did find the further we got into the rehearsal process, as long as it was a structured process, the clearer to me would become the image of what this show was going to be.
Sure.
I always had a sense of tone or color or a kind of vague feeling of what the show was going to be. But I would also always encourage actors to take risks and throw away the obvious choices and explore more interesting choices, because rehearsing performance, whatever medium, it's about making choices. There are many ways you can play an intention. For me, compelling work from an audience's point of view is when the performers have made the not obvious choices.
Yeah.
So you are being surprised by what you're watching, even though it makes perfect sense.
And curious too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I really enjoyed the process. And then as the whole thing was coming together over the 4 or 5 weeks of rehearsal, I would start thinking about lighting and sound, and I would evolve a visual sense of how it would look and how the lighting would contribute to the rhythm of the piece as a whole. Because for me, stage lighting is a bit like editing in film and TV.
Sure.
It can dictate rhythm and pace and selective focus and all those kinds of things. And because I had a background in lighting and sound with my parents' mime company back to when I was 13 or so, I was very at home in the technical theatre world, which translated very easily into screen directing, which is where I moved after theatre, because that also is a very technical medium.
Yes, it is.
But also it's about storytelling, and it's also about working with actors and scripts. So there's a lot in common, although it is a very different way of telling a story.
Yeah.
I love being in the thick of technical production, I guess, as well as the process of extracting surprising and original choices from a group of people's imaginations to contribute to a whole that ideally will engage an audience and take them on a journey and never let them go until the curtain call. I've experienced a lot of theatre which has bored me in my life. I think that theatre these days, in New Zealand anyway, is struggling as a medium.
Okay.
There isn't enough of it, and there isn't enough continuous work for practitioners to be able to get very good at it. So for all sorts of reasons, reductions in funding over the decades, shift in people's choices in terms of how they spend their time, particularly with the internet and streaming and those kinds of things. It's a big effort to go to the theatre. And if 4 times out of 5 you're kind of slightly bored or disappointed, people lose the habit of going as audiences.
Yeah.
And I come from a background where, for me, the most exciting experiences I've had as an audience member have been in the theatre. And I'm always trying to rediscover that flash of joy, that feeling when you're in a room full of people sharing an experience and feeling the hairs rise up on the back of your neck because something has touched you or affected you so profoundly. And I know other art forms can have exactly the same relationship with a viewer or an audience member, but for me, it's theatre when it's at its best.
Yeah. I mean, a theater has a certain intimacy to it that film and television, I suppose, can have a flavor of that. But live theater, there's a real physical, tangible relationship that the audience and the performers have.
That's right. And also, it's a communal event.
Yeah.
You are in a room with a group of people sharing an experience, and that experience is never going to be the same. I mean, the actors might be performing the same script, but there will always be slight variations in performance, and the audience's reaction will always be slightly different. But like a Saturday night show is quite different to a Sunday matinee show,
Yes.
because the audiences come with different expectations. And if it's a Saturday night, they might have been out to dinner and had a drink or two before they come to the theatre, and they're in a celebratory mood. On a Sunday afternoon, they might be much older and quieter, and their taste might be different. So that's just as an example how each performance is different. And the other thing I think about theatre that we don't get so much these days is the importance of ritual. Both being a performer and an audience member attending a theatre performance, you're engaging in a ritual. And I think that ritual is hugely significant part of being human. And generally in our secular world, we have a lot less of it.
Yes.
I mean, there are weddings and there are funerals, and that's about it for many, many people. I think ritual can unlock a power of the imagination, a power of community, and a spiritual sense of togetherness. And it is very important. And we become more and more separated in our lives because of technology and all kinds of things that have happened in this world over the last 30 or 40 years. And ritual is one of the things that has gone out of the window for many.
And there are a wide variety of different rituals involved in the theater, I think. And some of them are more overt and some of them are very subtle. There's almost something spiritual about what we're doing. I mean, I think even just the act of telling stories together is very ritualistic, I think.
I completely agree. And I'm not religious, but I do have a sense of spirituality.
Sure.
And the home of that spirituality for me is in the theatre.
Yeah.
Because there is an energy that comes from the relationships between audience and performer and between audience members that is bigger than any of us as individuals. The other thing I believe is that energy can find its way into the bones of a building.
Yes.
You can walk into a theater and have a sense of the history of performance and entertainment and storytelling that's gone on in that place.
Just even the smell of the theater, it just hits you.
That's right. And there is a certain sacredness to that. And there always will be. I feel very privileged to have been able to work in the theater, and I don't do nearly enough of it. I would jump at the chance to do more. 2019 was the last theater I directed, and it is definitely my spiritual home. So I hope to get back there before too long.
Well, I wanted to ask you, I was reading shortly after you finished drama school, or I want to say around that time, you co-relaunched something called Bats Theater in Wellington with a designer named Simon Elson. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what is Bats Theater? How did you get involved with it? And I would love to hear more about that.
Well, Bats Theater is a pillar in the Wellington theatre world. It's a developmental theatre, an incubator theatre, I guess you could call it. It specializes in new works and emerging practitioners, people who are finding their first feet in the art form, in the industry, and new plays that are being tested in front of audiences. And that's what it's become known for over the years. This was back in 1988, 89, when I was just finishing drama school. And it was born out of pragmatism, really. I had friends who were young playwrights who I'd been at university with, and I wanted to direct, and I wanted to work on their plays with them, but there was nowhere to do the work because the established theatres were pretty much closed shop to young people fresh out of drama school. To get a show on in one of those theatres, you had to be connected to the people who made the decisions. It's the whole gatekeeper thing, which I think every young person who wants to move into the creative world, whether it's theatre or television or filmmaking, it's one of the biggest challenges is getting through that gate to be able to do the work that you feel you're compelled to make. And back then, there were no options, but there was an old theatre that had been around since the 1920s. It was then called Bats Theatre. It had been Unity Theatre back in the 1960s and early 70s. And before that, it had been the Savage Club back in the 1920s and 1930s, where, there were dance bands. And it was the lodge of the Royal Antediluvian Order of the Buffaloes, which was a society who owned the building and had their lodge upstairs. And I don't know much about the Buffaloes. They're not there anymore. They ended up
talk about these buildings having histories to them.
They ended up selling the building. But one of the things about Bats Theatre was that I think might have been Wednesdays and Sundays, the Buffaloes would have their ceremonies upstairs, and there'd be kind of ritualistic foot stomping on the ceiling.
Yeah, they had rituals of their own.
And then a piano would sort of hammer out "God Save the Queen." And those things would always leak down to the theatre. You couldn't avoid them. It wasn't soundproofed.
Would that happen during shows, like during plays?
Yeah, absolutely. But everyone kind of got used to it.
It's amazing.
And I worked there when it was Unity Theatre. And my father directed a play in 1975. I think I'd have been 10. 11. It was a commedia dell'arte play called The Venetian Twins by Goldoni, and I would come on as a kind of Pierrot type character just during the opening sequence, which was all the traveling players assembled prior to doing the play, and I play the violin. And then after the opening scene, I would have a bed in the props room, which was under the stairs of the auditorium. And I could stand on tiptoes and peer through a slot in the stairs and watch the show and listen to the audience.
Oh, wow.
And in the props room along with me were lots of glasses of cask wine and cheese cubes on sticks because they were handed out to the audience during the interval as part of the show.
Yeah.
And I always associate theatre with the sort of smell of cheap cask wine and musty props and costumes in that cupboard where I would sleep every night for the 6-week season. So that was the theatre was kind of in my blood in a way, that particular theatre. And then it was run by an amateur society called the Bain and Austin Theatre Society, which the initials spell BATS, Bain and Austin Theatre Society. And Rodney Bain and David Austin took it over from Unity and ran it as an amateur company. But they ran out of steam, and for maybe 5 or 6 years, it had really just been a shell of a venue for hire and was falling into disrepair. And when I was at drama school, we used it for our drama school productions because it was just down the road. And also, I had been involved when I was at university with some friends and colleagues putting on plays there, sort of on a semi-professional basis. And so I knew it really well. And Simon Elson was a theatre technician and set designer. And he worked at Downstage, which was then the big professional theatre in Wellington. And he and I had worked together on the Victoria University Summer Shakespeare, which was King Lear, which I directed as my summer job between my first and second years at drama school, which was the best summer job ever. We both had a similar sense of dissatisfaction with the status quo of what theatre was. We saw it as kind of staid and old-fashioned and a bit dull. And we wanted to revitalize theatre, as you do when you're young, because there was nowhere to do the work that I wanted to do. We basically rented the theatre for a 6-month lease from the, Vane and Austin Incorporated Society. And we spent the summer after I finished drama school begging for building supplies and paint. And because Simon was a builder, he was handy at that kind of thing. So he took over the refurbishment and I took over the administration, trying to, raise sponsorship and writing letters and trying to make it a going concern. And we reopened sort of 4 months later with a program of work that filled the 6 months or 4 months that we rented the theatre for. And I directed the second play up after the opening, which was a play by playwright Ken Duncombe and Rebecca Rodden, who I had a history with through university. And it was one of the plays on my list that I desperately wanted to do. And I directed that, and it was a big hit. Then I directed another show of Ken's called Blue Sky Boys about the Everly Brothers that sold out 2 days after it had opened. It's a 4-week season because Bats only has 92 seats. It's a tiny little theatre.
Oh, it's a small theatre.
It's really small. And then we transferred to the St. James Theatre, which is a 1,400-seat theatre. It's, big proscenium arch theatre. So we went from the tiny theatre to the big theatre with that production, which was exhilarating. It was very exciting. And basically, the people who held the lease to the theatre saw that we were doing good work and revitalizing it and basically assigned the lease to us. So Simon and I leased it directly from the Buffaloes who owned the building. We ran it as a ongoing theatre, and Simon had worked at the King's Head Theatre Club in Islington in London. So he was familiar with fringe theatre, which wasn't really a thing in New Zealand at that stage.
Sure. Is that similar to the fringe theatre that they do in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Festival?
Very much so, yeah.
Okay.
It's almost an all-comers theatre. It's for the smaller scale, less expensive, more experimental, riskier shows that are different to the glossier main bill shows in an arts festival.
I just had to drop that reference so that the listeners know I'm cultured.
Yeah. I mean, most arts festivals around the world will have a fringe attached.
Yes, of course.
Because there's a gravitational pull of an arts festival. Like all the people who are starting out or will always be too alternative to be mainstream.
We got to have some weird stuff.
Exactly. Send in the clowns. Yeah, so Bats hosted the first Fringe Festival in Wellington, and also it was doing like up to 3 different shows a day. There would be a main bill show, there'd be a lunchtime show, and there'd be a late night show, all different, all sharing the space.
Nice.
And it was very much aimed at a younger audience, and how we kind of marketed and sold the show sold the theatre was as it was a venue for emerging practitioners. And we made it as easy as possible for people to put shows on there. Like, we didn't charge a rental. We charged, I think it was 15% of the box office take.
Oh, nice.
That was so. The theatre had a vested interest in the shows being successful. If a show sold out, then you made enough money to be able to cover costs. If it didn't, you didn't. So that was how we started it out. I moved away from management of the theatre because being a theatre manager wasn't what I wanted to do. I wanted to direct shows. So I moved much more into directing and became known for my work and started getting offers around the country. And my ambition and the kinds of shows I wanted to do got bigger and bigger. But the theatre kept going, and Simon, my business partner, kept running it. And he was basically sole charge. I think it was him and a technician were doing everything. He was there from 8 a.m. till midnight every day, and it took its toll. And we had to make it more business-like, so we formed a limited company, and we got tax-free status, and we got ongoing Arts Council funding. All those kinds of things that grown-up organizations do. Ultimately, Simon and I technically owned the business that was the theatre, probably for about 18, 19, 20, maybe 20 years, and then because I'd moved to Auckland and Simon wasn't in Wellington anymore, we ended up handing our shares in the theatre over to a trust, which would then take over the running of the theatre. And it's much better to have an on-the-ground body that is governing an organisation than two absent 100% shareholders, which is what we were. And I do think that quite reasonably we became a bit resented by the people who were then at the theatre. And long story short, eventually the Buffaloes wanted to sell the building because they found the flights of stairs too much in their advancing years.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's fair.
The theatre was always under threat because the building was always going to be sold out under us and demolished to make apartments or something like that. But Peter Jackson, filmmaker Peter Jackson, and Fran Walsh, his partner, stepped in and bought the building.
Whoa. This is, again, for those listening, this is Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson.
This is Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson, who is kind of very much a creative industry mogul in Wellington, because that's where all his operations are based. And they bought the building, they gutted it, they earthquake strengthened it because it was not particularly sound from an earthquake safety point of view. And then they rebuilt it in perfect 1920s as if brand new detail on the inside.
Oh, how cool.
Light fixtures, everything. It was like a brand new building that had been built in the 1920s. And not only did it have the original 92-seat auditorium, but it had two more spaces. There was the space that had been the Buffalo Temple that was now a flexible, larger theatre space. And there was also a studio space on the top floor. So it became a 3-auditorium theatre facility, which is what it is now. And it's still
beautiful.
bats. And God, 1989 till now, it must be 37 years ago since Simon and I established it. And I feel very proud that the theatre is still going from strength to strength in Wellington, and feeling that I contributed to it being what it is. I look back and see that as being one of the highlights of my career. I was only 24 at the time. I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what the risks were. I just wanted somewhere to put on shows. So it was driven entirely by pragmatism, but it became, I think, a very important arts centre.
Well, and it wouldn't be here today if you hadn't done that.
No, probably not. It would be an apartment block.
You hinted at something just a little bit earlier, and about around that time, you could sense your own sort of directing career starting to take off. And now, at some point, you made the jump from theater to television. You were involved for many, many years with South Pacific Pictures. You were, I think, for 20 years connected with Shortland Street, which is New Zealand's longest-running soap, and then eventually became head of drama at South Pacific Pictures, which is New Zealand's largest television production company. Is that right?
That's right. It was kind of accidental that I ended up working in television. I'd worked in theatre since leaving drama school for maybe 8 years. And over that time, I would have directed 4 or 5 productions a year. So I was quite prolific. And I knew that I loved making theatre, but also knew that it was very difficult to survive, to make a living.
Sure.
The amount of time you'd have to be planning something as a director wasn't being paid for. It's an impoverished industry. And I got married. We had plans for the future, which involved the possibility of having a family and buying a house and all those kinds of grown-up things. And it just became apparent that as long as I was only working in the theatre, none of those things were ever going to happen. I was stuck, basically. Sure. And just coincidentally, a friend sent me a newspaper clipping, again, this is pre-internet, which was advertising for a fast turnaround television director's course, which South Pacific Pictures, who are a production company, were making Shortland Street, which, as you say, it's a medical soap opera, hospital drama. And it had been established with the help of Australian expertise, like the people who made The Young Doctors and Neighbours and those kinds of shows, had come to New Zealand, and because they had the systems and the formulas and they knew how to do it, because making 5 episodes of TV drama a week is just logistically and technically not an easy thing.
No, it's a lot of work.
It requires systems and expertise. And anyway, the time it had been running for a couple of years, and the Australian contingent wanted to go back to Australia, and it was time to actually train up and replace those roles with New Zealanders. And there weren't enough people in New Zealand who had experience with multi-camera drama directing, which is what it was. It was old school. You would play each scene live, and the cameras would be switched live.
Yeah.
So as a director, you'd have to prepare a camera script in advance with all the shot descriptions and all the cut points and which camera had which shot, and you'd have to stage it according to the cameras, and the vision switcher in the control room would be live cutting from camera to camera, and that's what was recorded.
Yeah, it's almost like the way sitcoms are filmed in the United States, and they might be filmed that way in New Zealand and the UK and Britain. I'm not sure, but yeah, very similar production flow.
But I think sitcoms, at least traditionally, were filmed on 35 millimeter film cameras, like multiple cameras, and they were all rolling at the same time. So you actually had editing choices after the fact. But what we were doing, we were just recording the switched feed. So there was no opportunity to...
You couldn't go edit later.
No.
Oh, wow.
It had to be right. You could tighten maybe, or you could switch between takes. Like you could have the first half of take 1 and the second half of take 2. But often the continuity was askew when you tried to do that. So anyway, it's a very old-fashioned way. It's the old BBC way of making studio drama.
Yes.
It's very rarely done anymore. But it was a specialized skill, and the theory of the people who were running the course was, we can teach people the technical aspects of multi-camera directing, but we can't teach them performance direction because that takes a lot of experience to acquire. And so the people who were on the course, myself included, there were 5 of us, all had kind of theatre or performance directing backgrounds.
Because they needed that.
And we were taught the technical aspects of both multi-camera studio shooting and single camera location filming, because there's a bit of that on Shortland Street as well. It was a 3 or 4 month course in a warehouse somewhere semi-industrial, and we were all paid to do it. I mean, where else in the world would you be paid to do a training course with a job at the end of it?
It's pretty good.
It was pretty good. And there are only 2 places in terms of director placements. So it was competitive. And I think we had 5 practical exercises across the course. And they were also taking on a complement of trainee writers, screenwriters. So we got to direct the scripts that the teams of writers created. So it was fun. And at the end of it, I was lucky enough to be given a job directing a kids show called Riding High, which was all on location. Most of the cast were children, and it involved horses and stunts.
Oh my
so
God!
It was technically it was a trial by fire, but I learned a huge amount. I was attached to a senior director for like the first couple of blocks, maybe 6 episodes, and then I was on my own. I really enjoyed it and found that I was good at it, and my background in technical theatre and performance directing in theatre meant that I had a natural affinity for telling stories with actors. And I'd also always taken photographs. I've always enjoyed photography. So thinking in terms of the frame was not a challenge either. So all the things I'd done over the years came together and made sense. And what television provided, and after Riding High, I went on to Shortland Street, which I directed for just over a year before I was offered the producer role on the show, which is basically in charge of making the show as a creative producer role. So I was constantly learning and growing into the industry quite quickly advancing. And the thing about television work was that although I was good at it and did enjoy it, it wasn't soul food for me in the way that theatre had been. It
Sure.
didn't work on that kind of, this is my natural home, this is my habitat, this is my special place. But it paid. It gave me a good living.
And that matters.
I've been very lucky in that I've been able to make a good living all my career in a creative sphere. And there aren't a lot of people who can say that. All the time I was doing television, I was trying to get back into theatre just to feed the habit. I did take time off from Shortland Street for a month, I think, to direct a Sondheim musical Assassins at the Watershed Theatre in Auckland.
Yes.
So I got to play in that sandpit. And then when I finished producing Shortland Street for the first time, which would have been 2001, that was when I set up the touring theatre company, the New Zealand Actors Company, with Tim and Robin and Katie, when we toured those big Shakespeare shows. Because we'd all worked in television, we knew the power of profile to actually generate interest in the media and audiences. And we had a lot of friends and colleagues who were good trained theatre actors, but had gained profiles through television work. And so we harnessed that with our touring theatre company and how we marketed it. And as a result, we were able to get significant sponsors on board, and we had TV advertising campaigns, and we sold out around the country. It was a brilliant experience.
That's wonderful. I did not grow up watching Shortland Street here in the United States, but I was reading a little bit about it, and some of the storylines that I heard about. It was a soap opera, long running. Is it still on the air?
It's still on the air.
So it's still in production. Storylines included serial killers, volcanic eruptions, hospital sieges, Christmas cliffhangers. There's just this wonderful sort of heightened genre storytelling, and of course that's very common in soap operas. But as I was reading about this, it occurred to me to be able to work within that kind of heightened storytelling that must have come in handy a little bit later when you became involved with shows like Power Rangers and things like that also have very heightened plots and storylines and things like that. Is that fair to say, do you think?
I think it is fair to say that I learned a lot about story structure at Shortland Street.
Okay.
I spent a lot of time on the story table, where you'd have to generate 5 episodes worth of story a week. And also every 3 months or so, you'd have a weekend retreat with the writers where you plan the big arcs for the next 3 or 4 months.
Yes.
I learned about beating out stories, and I learned about cliffhangers, and I learned about what the important things that you need, what the obstacles are, how characters manifest what they want, turning points within stories, reversals, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
That definitely has stood me in good stead, throughout my screen career after that. Although I do think that nightly soap is a very particular medium. I mean, the Christmas cliffhangers were always fun because when the show first started, it played right through Christmas. There was no break. And Christmas in New Zealand, of course, is the summer break.
Yes.
So everyone goes on holiday, which is why no one really watches television in, late December, January. It's the downtime for the industry. After a few years, the network took it off air over the Christmas break, which meant that, early December, you had to have a whole week that built to crises that were so incredibly profound that audiences would theoretically be talking about them over the entire 6 weeks that they were on holiday and be desperate to come back. And
we can't wait to come back and watch it when it comes back on.
Exactly. Find out what happened. So
yes.
I think my first Christmas cliffhanger as producer, we had a plane crash, like 2 actors went down in a light plane. Did they survive or not? We had one of our other much loved characters found guilty of murder in an assisted suicide story.
Oh no.
We had another 2 characters who were in a relationship finding out that they were actually brother and sister.
Oh no. It's the Luke and Leia dilemma.
Yeah, that was all in 1 year. So those kinds of outrageous stories.
Amazing. I love it.
I mean, I think whatever you're making, you have to know your audience. You have to understand what they want. You have to understand what the parameters are of a particular show.
Sure.
Beyond which you have jumped the shark and lost the audience.
Sure.
Shortland Street shark jumping seems impossible. But something like Power Rangers, I think, is much more prescribed. It has a very clear audience.
Yes.
And it's very formulaic. And while I did try and make changes during the time I was running that show, they were less drastic, I think. And also, I was responding to criticisms that I'd read from long-term fans online and my own instincts about where I thought the show could be improved while still retaining its core essence.
Do you feel that fans of science fiction and fantasy have real opinions about the media that they consume? Can they be expressive about their... I'm being a little cheeky here.
They're terrifying. Rabid is another word. Obsessive.
I know I have never been like this about the things that I like. I'm talking purely about other people, not myself.
No, I opened a Pandora's box for myself by engaging with the fandom on Power Rangers.
Okay.
And with previous shows that I worked on in New Zealand, like Outrageous Fortune was a significant, long-running, hour-long drama series that ran for 6 seasons, and I was executive producer and the director on that, and it was a great experience working on that show. But once the internet became part of everyone's lives, and Twitter in particular became a significant form of instant communication, yes. I guess. I really enjoyed reading people's live tweets as the show was going to air.
Oh, fun.
And then I got involved live tweeting as the director or the producer while the show was airing.
Uh-oh.
And it was fun and it was fine. And I had no problem with it. It was a great way for me of accessing how an audience was responding to the show. Because, of course, in the theater, in an audience, you feel it. You can sense when an audience is engaged or when they're fidgety. You can sense when an audience is shocked or saddened or laughing. But with television, it's an artifact that you make.
Yeah, it's much harder to do that.
Yeah, and you hope it's going to land, and you just throw it out there, and you never really know. Yes, you get ratings figures, but they don't tell you how an audience has engaged across the half hour or an hour that they've been sitting watching a program. So the live tweeting thing was a way of actually, I mean, on one hand, it was egotistical because I craved some kind of feedback to the work.
But what artist doesn't? I mean, that's how,
exactly.
That's the whole relational part of creating something is to...
I think so. But it was also instructive because I could tell if I'd misjudged how an audience was going to react to something or understand something, or if what I was trying to do was working, it was landing.
Yeah.
So it was useful. And once I moved into Power Rangers and became executive producer, I tried to do the same thing. And I also got involved with a website called Ranger Board.
I know of Ranger Board.
Primary fan message board website for the show.
I've gotten in trouble on Ranger Board before.
And what it taught me was that creators should never engage with the fandom in an uncontrolled fashion, I guess, is the best way to describe it. Because all kinds of parasocial things can end up happening where people start to think they know you and they start to think that they own you to an extent. And also because people are, in their darkened room tapping away at their keyboard, they feel they can say anything. There's no self-censorship. There's no manners. There's no courtesy. It got really tough. And I found myself trying to defend some of the decisions I'd made with the show and got into some arguments with fans. And, what I learned was that you can never please everyone. Fans of a science fiction property who have been fans for a very long time are very particular in their opinions about the show, and you can't really change them. And it's best not to engage with them because often the level of that fandom is quite obsessive. It definitely comes with a sense of ownership and protectiveness towards the property. And it can be quite combative, I guess. And it's not worth the psychic energy that engaging on that level. It sapped me to an extent.
Sure,
and I took some of it personally, and it was stressful. And I ended up actually taking myself off social media for quite some time after that experience because it took too much of my time and energy, and I got sucked in an unhealthy way. And, it was a learning and growing experience for me. And it's not something I will do again because I've been bitten.
Yeah, I hear you. there are other IPs, intellectual properties in that genre, science fiction, fantasy, whatever you want to call it. Like Star Wars, for example, is notorious.
I'm sure Star Wars is worse.
Yeah, but there are artists, directors, producers, actors who don't want to get involved. I mean, they may love Star Wars, but that's the piece they don't want to deal with because it's just too much. It's just too much drama. It's too much baggage. And why exhaust yourself?
I think ideally in the industry, once you reach kind of Star Wars level, you're pretty high up the chain, is you have people who run your social media for you. You don't actually do it yourself.
There you go. That's the way to do it. Pay someone else to take all that psychic baggage. You don't have to.
Yeah, and you have publicists and people who run the socials. Basically, you just don't get involved on social media. If you have an Instagram account, it's closed and it's only accessible to people who actually are your real friends and family.
Who can have real conversations with you.
Exactly.
Well, you and I have a mutual acquaintance in common. Ron Wasserman, who, among his many achievements, he sang and wrote the original Mighty Morphin Power Rangers theme song, Go Go Power Rangers. He also scored all of the background music on the show, the original show, for many, many years. He's worked on a million other projects, and I've mentioned Ron on this podcast before. He's a very dear friend of mine. He and I have known each other for the better part of 20 years now, and you worked with him on a Power Rangers project called Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Once and Always, which was a feature-length 30th anniversary episode of the TV series, which you executive produced. And it brought back a lot of original cast members, and you brought Ron back to do the music. And I have known Ron for a very long time. One of the things that I know about him is that if he has a bad experience working on a project, he is not afraid to be honest about it. He may not always talk about all of it publicly, but he is not afraid to tell people what he thinks about stuff. And I can vividly remember, I think when he was starting to work on it, I don't know if it had been announced yet or not, but he had texted me that he was going to come back. And he, at the time, there was not a lot he could share because it was all very secret and very, very hush-hush. But the one thing he did share with me was how much he enjoyed working with you. He said that collaborating with you in particular was a real pleasure. He really enjoyed it and had a good experience.
Oh, that's lovely. It was mutual. It was so nice to actually work with him. It was all done, of course, by Zoom because he was in the States and I was in New Zealand.
Yeah.
But we had a few Zoom conversations and talked through the episode, and I loved what he brought to the table. And he's so positive and so enthusiastic. And it was just an absolute pleasure. And also his knowledge of the show from way back when. And the themes that he contributed have become such a huge part of the lore of the show.
Sure.
I came late to Power Rangers, but there are people who watched it since 1992 or 3, back to MMPR days, and know every season and every detail out of what was an incredibly chaotic and unplanned series of different episodes. Have invented this kind of lore that embraces the whole Power Rangers universe. Once and Always, it was nice to be able to delve back into the MMPR cast and stories and days. It was very quick. It was like a blink. For me, a season of Power Rangers like Dino Fury is 2 years worth of work.
Wow.
Whereas something like Once and Always, it was really about 6 weeks worth of work. Because it was only a double episode.
Yeah, sure.
We wrote it and rewrote it beforehand. The show changed quite a lot in the writing because Hasbro kept changing their mind about what it was they wanted Once and Always to be.
Hasbro owns Power Rangers.
They own Power Rangers. They own the IP.
They own it.
Yeah. So it was about wanting to re-engage lapsed viewers of Power Rangers, basically fans of the show who no longer watched, and their families. That was the target audience. But it went from being, a kid's show to be a family show to be a lapsed fan show. And each of those different audiences have different sort of requirements or needs. So the story changed accordingly and the characters changed accordingly. So it wasn't particularly easy to make. Bringing a whole lot of returning cast back to the show, 2 of the original MMPR cast, and then 4 or 5 from later seasons to fill out the numbers. There's a certain weight that goes with their histories with the show and the years of attending conventions, and the level of importance that those individuals have to the brand is significant.
Sure.
So Power Rangers has never been a sort of star-based show. Usually the cast are young up-and-comers. So it's quite a different dynamic when you've got people who have been associated with the brand for a very long time. But they were nice people. They were enthusiastic about the project and worked very hard. The other thing that was unusual for me about Once and Always was that I'd been pretty much left alone to make the show up to that point. But we had a couple of Hasbro execs who came over to sit by the monitor the entire time we were shooting on Once and Always.
Okay. That's different.
And I think it was partly to look after the very important returning characters.
Sure.
But also to monitor that what we were doing was up to scratch in terms of standards. Because Hasbro bought the franchise from Saban back in 2018, 2019. So it was relatively new, a new property for Hasbro. And I think the executives in charge of the show kept getting replaced. You know, they'd move on to another brand. And so there was not really much of a continuity of care. Like the people who had been with Saban brands were kept on initially and then let go, and then new people were brought on, and then they moved on, and then new people were brought on.
It's very tricky.
It's tricky when you're making the show to actually gauge what the expectations from the owner.
Yeah, because who is the owner at any given moment?
They do keep changing. And I had to learn a lot because when I started as a director on Ninja Steel, I'd never watched Power Rangers. I knew nothing about it.
Sure.
But I had to learn fast because I was responsible for directing it before I became executive producer. And then you get people coming in and saying, why don't they all have separate special powers? Like, why isn't one super fast and one of the Rangers can go invisible and like proper superheroes? We're trying to explain, well, when they morph, it means they can fight better than they could before.
Is this the audience asking this or studio executives?
This is the studio executives.
I see. Okay.
Or why do they have fights unmorphed? Because the fans love the unmorphed fights when they can see the actual actors do the fighting.
Yeah, they've been doing that for like 30, 40 years or something.
Yeah, but there's no logical story reason why they should fight unmorphed. Why don't they morph and then fight? The fight would be over much more quickly.
Well, if we're going to talk about logical story reasons with Power Rangers, I got some devastating news, my dude.
This is the constant battle. There's been a tension there in that as long as I've been associated with the show, which is since Ninja Steel, it was always aimed at kids, particularly younger kids.
Yeah.
Like by the time I was working on the show, I was told that the target audience was preschoolers who couldn't read.
Whoa.
Therefore, you couldn't have any writing on screen that was critical to plot. It was really young kids.
Interesting.
And it meant that the language had to be simplistic and there was a lot of repetition. There had to be a very clear, very clean moral message for every episode, and there had to be your at least 2 comedy duo slapstick scenes per episode. Those were the mandates in order to make the show work for those little kids. But of course, the original fans of the show who'd been with it since its inception were now in their 30s, possibly heading for 40s. And the show they were watching was not the show they wanted to see. They wanted the show to grow up as they had grown up and improve in sophistication rather than as they saw it go backwards. So that was always one of the tensions with the show. Those kinds of tensions are an example of the challenges of making a show that will please both a young audience who will grow out of it after 2 years.
Yes.
And an audience who's been with it for most of their lives and for whom it is incredibly important and a passion. That's the challenge. How do you satisfy both those audiences? And as far as the young kids goes, you've got the parents to take into consideration as well, because the parents have to, A, be comfortable enough with the show to allow their little kids to watch it, and B, want to buy the toys at holiday time.
Right. Well, I did watch the Once and Always special when it aired, and it partially because, so I grew up watching Power Rangers. And when I was like probably 9 or 10, I watched it religiously, the original show. I just thought it was the coolest, most exciting. It was robots, monsters, all the things that pre-adolescent boys love. And then probably about, the age of 13 or so, kind of fell off the wagon and didn't really think about it much for a long time. And then Ron and I became friends as I got a little bit old. That's a whole different story. And that kind of reintroduced it back into my psyche. I don't watch the show, but I have a lot of affection for the idea of the show. And so when the Once and Always special was airing, I did want to watch it partially because Ron was going to be in it. And it was kind of neat to see like, oh, these are actors I remember, playing characters I remember. And the impression I had while watching it was it maintained that cheesiness and corniness that I remembered as a kid, that it's like the DNA of the show, but it also, the storyline, there was a little bit more emotional weight to it, and there's, and it didn't go quite overboard. It held that tension very elegantly, I thought. I enjoyed it. It was fun to watch.
Well, that's great to hear, because it was made for lapsed fans, which is how you've just described yourself, someone who used to watch it.
Sure.
Fell off the wagon and came back because it was the original cast members. And so we were allowed to be a bit darker and a little bit more mature. We could say killed rather than destroyed.
Sure.
In dialogue. Trini's death at the beginning was a very strong thing to start a Power Rangers episode off on. And you're right, that cheesiness is an essential part of the DNA of Power Rangers. It always has been. And if it wasn't there, I think people like yourself who loved the show back in the 90s would have been a bit disappointed, because it's part of the fun of watching the show is it's corny.
Yeah.
To a certain level, you go beyond that level and you lose people. I'm interested to see what happens with the new Disney Plus show that is apparently about to start shooting from what...
Oh, I didn't even know they were shooting a new one.
Oh, no. Internet rumors say that, well, not just rumors, it's been published in industry periodicals, but there's a new season of Power Rangers that is being made for Disney Plus that is being shot in the UK, apparently.
Okay.
And they're due to start shooting next month, but no casting news has leaked. There's nothing out there about it. I know nothing about it, other than I suspect it will be an attempt. Well, I know it's a reboot, so it will be an attempt to reinvent what Power Rangers is for a modern, older audience. They'll be going for
like maybe preteens or...
Yeah, YA, young adult kind of audiences, a bit like the Superman remakes.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So it'll be interesting to see how much of the original DNA of the show is still there. I know that the Hasbro execs I worked with on Cosmic Fury and Once and Always really didn't take to that traditional Japanese infected Super Sentai influenced style of Power Rangers.
Yeah, I'm sure. For those listening who don't know what in the world we're talking about, which may be like 99.9% of people listening, Power Rangers historically is a show that a lot of the footage of the human characters is shot in the United States, or it was. I mean, now it's in New Zealand and all that stuff. But when they are like superheroes fighting monsters and robots, a lot of that is footage from an old Japanese show called Super Sentai, which had been running since like the 70s, I think. It's this very interesting blend of American footage and old Japanese superhero footage that's sort of like mashed together. And the storylines of the two shows are completely different, but the American version of Power Rangers just like makes it make sense. Is that a fair description?
That's a very fair description. And writing Power Rangers, the starting point was always what bits of Japanese footage could we use? And they were always bits where you couldn't see faces, because once you see faces, it's not going to work in terms of using it in the American show. But we actually found ourselves using less and less Japanese footage. In Cosmic Fury, which was the last season, I think it averaged about 1 minute, 15 seconds of Japanese footage per episode.
Wow.
Whereas it had been much more than that.
Yeah, in the old days, it was probably like half the show.
Yeah. And all the Ranger footage was original. All the fight footage was original. It was just some of those Zord robot-y shots. We used Japanese footage because we didn't have the resources to recreate them. But that was driven by the feeling from the Hasbro people that the monsters in rubber suits and the heightened emotional gestures of the suited Ranger performances, and it was very stylized in a very Japanese way.
Yeah.
And they felt that, and they're probably right, I think, was that it no longer held appeal for American young viewers, apart from the very young, who were so young that they didn't really concern themselves about what was cool and what was uncool.
I see.
So I think that the new season remake will be trying to inject some cool back into the Power Rangers brand. And that'll be a very interesting experiment to see how it works.
Well, stay tuned, sports fans. Simon, you've had this very, very rich wealth of creative experiences over a wide range of artistic styles. You're the child of two mimes. You've directed theater and musical theater. You've done long-form television. You've done superhero genre stuff. You've developed this wide range of artistic tools in your toolbox. I wanted to ask, what are the kinds of stories that you would love to tell next? Do you have a dream project that you would love to pursue if given the opportunity?
I have a number of dream projects. It's interesting. I turned 60 last year, which was a shock to myself, probably more than anyone else. You know, when you reach a certain age, opportunities aren't as forthcoming as when you're younger. And also, I think you understand the risks involved in ventures just through having been burnt in the past. It's harder to launch yourself into the abyss of a new creative venture. But there are things that I would love to do. I have a series of paranormal romance books that I would love to adapt into a series of movies. Can't say any more than that, but that's a project I've been working on for the last couple of years. I have co-written a play with my writing partner, Guy Langford, which I'm hoping to be able to direct at theatres around the country next year. I have a comedy drama series that's been optioned by a production company in Wellington that I would love to see happen. And if it did go ahead, I'd probably produce that and maybe direct some of that. So that's in the pipeline. In terms of what I would love to do most, I always don't want to jinx it, but I have a feature I would love to make called My Father the Mime Artist.
Oh, nice.
It's got, aspects of memoir to it, but it's also what the actual story and structure of it is. I'm still working out at the moment, but I'm thinking about it. That's something I would love to do.
Are you thinking that would be like a theater project or like a published?
No, I think it's a film.
Oh, a film.
I think it's a feature film. On my bucket list of theatre projects I would love to direct, if anyone would be foolhardy enough to give me the opportunity, Chekhov's The Seagull.
Oh, nice.
Which I just love and have been involved in, but have never directed. I would love to direct that play. And Sondheim's Company, the musical. They're my two bucket list works. I've directed Into the Woods, Assassins, and Merrily We Roll Along. And those three experiences have been among the highlights of my theatre career. And, working on Sondheim and Shakespeare for me is just such a joy because you unlock things and you learn and there is no bottom. You just keep digging and digging and digging. And creatively, they're both incredibly fulfilling writers to engage with. So those are my dreams at the moment.
Beautiful. Well, I know you mentioned getting off social media a little bit earlier, but for those who might be interested in keeping up with the work that you do or following any projects that might be in the pipeline, is there an appropriate way that folks may follow you online or keep up with Simon Bennett?
I am on Blue Sky. I have an Instagram account that people can find me on. I don't tend to engage with people who try and message me via social media if they're people I don't know, unless, like yourself, there's obviously a very valid and worthwhile cause behind it.
Well, I'll let you be the judge of that.
But Blue Sky and Instagram would be the best ways of finding what's going on.
Simon Bennett is a director and producer for theater and television. He has been, among other things, the head of drama at South Pacific Pictures in New Zealand. He served as a director for Power Rangers Ninja Steel, Super Ninja Steel, and as the executive producer and showrunner for Power Rangers Dino Fury, Cosmic Fury, and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Once and Always, the 30th anniversary special. Simon, you've been so generous with your time. I've so enjoyed just the gift of this conversation and getting to hear your story. Just thank you so much for taking the opportunity to speak with us.
Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure.
That's going to just about wrap it up for this episode of Don't Encourage This. If you'd like to hear more conversations like this one, you can search up Don't Encourage This on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, Player FM, a tin can with some string, or don't forget YouTube. You can drop the podcast a line at don'tencouragethis@gmail.com if you'd like to say hello, leave some feedback, or, just share what's on your mind. Would love to hear from you. Until next time, from Oxford, Ohio, I'm Mark Von Bullock. Thanks, y'all.